Commander Talia Vex Zora stood perfectly still, the dim emergency lights of her escape pod casting her silver skin in an eerie blue glow. Her antennae twitched, picking up unfamiliar scents that made her want to initiate decontamination protocols immediately. The landing, or rather, the crash, had not gone according to plan. None of this mission had. Status report, she whispered to her wrist communicator, her voice melodic despite her distress. This is Commander Talia Vex Zora of the Luminari Diplomatic Corps. The atmospheric interference forced emergency measures. Current location unknown. The communicator crackled. Commander, we've got your signal. You're approximately 12 kilometers from the rendezvous point. The humans are sending someone to guide you through their infrastructure. Talia's four-fingered hand hovered over the pod's exit panel. The scanner showed breathable air outside, but also high levels of microbial activity. Typical for Earth, but revolting by Luminari standards. Her people had evolved on a crystalline world of perfect geometric formations and naturally antiseptic environments. Cleanliness wasn't just a preference, it was embedded in their biology. Understood, she responded, steeling herself. This was why she had been chosen. Her adaptability was legendary among her kind, even if that only meant she could tolerate minor imperfections that would send other Luminari into protective stasis. The pod door slid open with a hiss, and Talia's olfactory sensors were immediately overwhelmed. She activated her personal filter, a thin membrane forming over her nose slits. The pod had pierced through multiple layers of the city's infrastructure, finally coming to rest in what appeared to be a large tunnel. Water, filthy, unprocessed water, flowed sluggishly around the pod's base. By the crystal spires, she muttered, her voice catching. I've landed in some sort of waste management conduit. A splash and a beam of light announced the arrival of her guide. A human male waded through the shallow water, wearing heavy boots and a yellow waterproof garment. His face was partially illuminated by the headlamp he wore, revealing a rugged, bearded visage and eyes that immediately widened upon seeing her. "Whoa," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "They said you'd be different, but—" He shook his head in apparent wonder. "I'm Finn Walsh, city maintenance engineer. Your people arranged for me to guide you through the sewers to the meeting point." "Sewers," Talia repeated, the translator implant in her brain providing the definition. Her silvery eyes narrowed. "You mean this is where you channel your biological waste?" Finn's lips twitched, forming what Talia recognized as the beginning of a smile. "Among other things, yes. It's actually a marvel of engineering when you think about it. This system handles millions of gallons of—" "Please," Talia raised a hand, her long fingers splayed in the universal gesture of stop. "The details are unnecessary." Now Finn was definitely smiling. "You might want to, adjust your outfit. Standard issue space diplomat wear isn't exactly sewer appropriate." Talia glanced down at her immaculate white uniform with its intricate silver embroidery. It was designed to be self-cleaning, but even Luminari technology had its limits. "I have protective gear," she said stiffly, reaching back into the pod and retrieving a small silver disc. She pressed it to her chest, and a translucent field shimmered briefly around her body before becoming invisible. "This will have to suffice." "Neat trick," Finn nodded appreciatively. "But it won't stop you from getting wet. The water level rises in some sections." Talia's antennae flattened against her head in dismay. "Water level rises? Don't worry, Commander. I'll get you through safely." There was that smile again, and something in Finn's tone that sounded suspiciously like amusement. "Follow me closely, and try to step where I step." As they moved away from the pod, Talia activated its security protocols. The craft sealed itself and initiated camouflage mode, its surface taking on the grimy appearance of the surrounding tunnel. 12 kilometers through this, Talia whispered to herself, carefully placing her boots in Finn's footprints. The human moved with surprising grace for such a bulky creature, clearly comfortable in this revolting environment. "Just wait until we hit the junction at Oakwood Street," Finn called back cheerfully. "There's a colony of bioluminescent fungi that's actually quite beautiful. Kinda reminds me of those pictures I saw of your homeworld." Talia wasn't sure what was more disturbing, the mention of fungal growth or the comparison to her pristine home planet. Either way, this was going to be the longest 12 kilometers of her life. "So your people literally polished the ground before walking on it?" Finn asked, his voice echoing off the curved walls of the maintenance tunnel. They had been traveling for nearly 2 hours, and to Talia's surprise, conversation had proven an effective distraction from her surroundings. "Not personally," she corrected, carefully stepping over a particularly suspicious puddle. "The Luminari use nano-cleaners that move ahead of us, ensuring the path is sterilized. It's automated." Finn chuckled, the sound bouncing around them like a living thing. "Must make spontaneous trips difficult. Hold on, can't visit Grandma yet, the path polishers are still working." Despite herself, Talia's lips curved upward. The human's irreverence was both shocking and strangely refreshing. "The system is quite efficient. But yes, Luminari culture values preparation over spontaneity." She paused, her antennae suddenly alert. "What is that sound?" Finn tilted his head, listening. "Ah, that's just rats. They're harmless, mostly." "Rats?" Talia's translator struggled momentarily. "Undomesticated mammalian scavengers? In your waste system?" The slight tremor in her voice betrayed her composure. "Nature always finds a way," Finn shrugged, splashing ahead. "These tunnels are their perfect habitat: shelter, water, food scraps. An entire ecosystem exists down here that most humans never see." Talia's personal shield flickered briefly as she processed this information. On her world, such creatures would be immediately contained and relocated to designated wildlife areas. The idea of willingly sharing infrastructure with wildlife was primitive, yet somehow fascinating. "Your species allows this coexistence?" "Allows? We can't stop it," Finn laughed. "Life adapts, Commander. That's what makes Earth different from most planets in our sector. We're messy, chaotic, and incredibly resilient because of it." He stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. They had reached a junction where several tunnels converged into a larger chamber. The ceiling rose high above them, dotted with maintenance entrances. Water from different tributaries merged here, creating a small whirlpool effect in the center. "We need to cross here," Finn explained, pointing to a narrow walkway that circled the chamber. "Stay close to the wall. The current's stronger than it looks." Talia eyed the churning water with undisguised horror. "Is there no alternative route?" "Not unless you want to add 3 hours to our journey." Steeling herself, Talia followed Finn onto the narrow ledge. The wall against her back was slick with moisture that her sensors identified as containing multiple bacterial colonies. She focused instead on Finn's back, noting the confident set of his shoulders. "Tell me about your world," he said over his shoulder, clearly trying to distract her again. The diplomatic brief mentioned crystal spires and atmospheric music. Grateful for the diversion, Talia described the Luminari homeworld with its geometrically perfect landscapes and cities built to harness light. As she spoke, she realized how clinical it all sounded: beautiful but sterile, perfect but unchanging. No weather variations? No seasons? Finn sounded genuinely perplexed. "Sounds a bit predictable." "Predictability ensures safety and efficiency," Talia responded automatically, the words feeling oddly hollow as they echoed in this chaotic underground world. They had nearly circled the chamber when Finn suddenly lost his footing. He slipped, arms windmilling as he fought for balance. Without thinking, Talia lunged forward, her reflexes inhumanly quick. Her long fingers wrapped around his wrist, her 4-digit grip surprisingly strong as she anchored herself against the wall. For a moment, they stood frozen, the human dangling partially over the churning water, the Luminari commander violating at least 6 different diplomatic protocols about physical contact with alien species. With a grunt, Talia pulled him back to safety. Her personal shield had deactivated on contact, an automatic feature to prevent accidentally hurting others, and she could feel the dampness of his sleeve against her sensitive skin. "Thanks," Finn gasped, eyes wide with residual fear and something else, surprise. That was some reaction time. Talia released him immediately, flustered by both the contact and the unexpected intensity of her response. Her shield reactivated with a soft hum, but something had changed. The barrier between them, physical and metaphorical, had momentarily dissolved. It was. She hesitated, searching for the proper diplomatic phrasing, then abandoned it. Instinctive. Finn studied her face, seeing something there that made his expression soften. "You know, for someone who supposedly values sterility, you've handled this trek better than most humans would." The compliment caught her off guard. "I am still registering everything I touch for decontamination upon return." "Fair enough," he grinned, leading her off the ledge and into a slightly wider tunnel. "But I bet your reports back home won't mention how quickly you moved to save a messy, chaotic human." Talia's antennae twitched in what Luminari would recognize as embarrassment. Perhaps some details are unnecessary for the official record. As they continued their journey, Talia found herself increasingly conscious of the space between them, no longer maintaining maximum distance, no longer flinching when water splashed too close. The ubiquitous filth remained disgusting, but she was adapting, finding a strange new equilibrium. "Up ahead is that fungal colony I mentioned," Finn said, his voice softening with genuine appreciation. "It's actually protected. Some university researchers discovered it's a unique subspecies that only grows here." Talia prepared herself for another revolting sight, but as they turned the corner, her breath caught. The ceiling and walls of the tunnel ahead were covered in delicate, glowing tendrils that pulsed with a soft blue-green light. The pattern was chaotic yet harmonious, creating an underwater effect that reminded her, improbably, of the night skies above her homeworld. "It's..." She struggled to find a suitably diplomatic word, then surrendered to honesty. "Beautiful." Finn's smile in the fungal light was genuine. "Thought you might appreciate it." Beauty in the most unexpected places, that's another Earth specialty. For the first time since crash landing, Commander Talia Vex Zora wondered if perhaps the contamination occurring wasn't just physical, but cultural, and whether that might not be entirely unwelcome. "Something's wrong with this water," Finn said, halting abruptly after they'd traveled another kilometer beyond the fungal colony. He crouched down, examining the flow with his headlamp. The beam revealed an oily sheen with unnatural purple highlights swirling across the surface. Talia's biological sensors had been alerting her for the past several minutes, but she'd attributed the warnings to the general foulness of their environment. Now, she activated her suit's advanced analysis mode. Tiny sensors extended from her wristband, taking readings of both the air and water. "These readings are concerning," she said, her melodic voice tightening. "I'm detecting synthetic compounds that aren't consistent with normal waste processing." Finn nodded grimly. "I was afraid of this. There have been reports of illegal dumping in this sector, but environmental protection hasn't been able to catch anyone in the act." He stood, wiping his gloved hands on his coveralls. "This stuff is nasty even by sewer standards. My analysis indicates compounds that would be toxic to humans with prolonged exposure," Talia confirmed, then hesitated. "And potentially lethal to Luminari physiology within hours." Finn's head snapped up, his expression changing from professional concern to personal alarm. "Your shield, will it protect you?" "Temporarily," Talia replied, glancing at the readout on her wrist. "But the molecular structure of these compounds is designed to permeate barriers. My shield was engineered for biological contaminants," not industrial solvents. Finn swore under his breath, a phrase her translator didn't bother converting. We need to find another route. He consulted a digital map projected from a device on his belt. The holographic display showed a maze of tunnels, with their current position blinking in red. Talia noted that the map was considerably less detailed than the precise navigational tools her people used, with many sections marked simply, unmapped, or approximate. That's not good, Finn muttered, tracing potential routes with his finger. The contamination is flowing from the direction of our primary alternative. We'd have to backtrack nearly 4 kilometers to find a clean path. That would put us significantly behind schedule, Talia observed, calculating quickly. The diplomatic rendezvous cannot be delayed. The Luminary Council is rigid regarding timetables. Finn looked up at her, the harsh light of his headlamp emphasizing the concern in his eyes. With all due respect, Commander, your safety is more important than any schedule. The sentiment caught Talia off guard. In Luminary culture, the mission always took precedence over individual comfort or even safety. The good of the many outweighed the needs of the one, it was fundamental to their society. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully, but I am authorized to accept reasonable risk in service of our diplomatic mission. There's nothing reasonable about exposure to illegal chemical waste, Finn argued, then suddenly froze, his attention caught by something in the tunnels ahead. Wait. Hold still. Talia complied instantly, her military training kicking in. Her antennae stiffened, enhancing her auditory reception. Now she could hear it too, voices echoing from further down the tunnel, accompanied by the sound of something heavy being dragged. Finn switched off his headlamp, plunging them into near darkness. Only the faint glow of Talia's wrist display and the distant emergency lights provided any illumination. He moved closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper. I think we've got company. Might be our dumpers. Talia considered their options. This could provide an opportunity to gather evidence of the illegal activity. Finn's eyebrows rose in surprise. Didn't expect an alien diplomat to suggest playing detective. On my world, environmental crimes are considered among the most serious offenses, Talia explained quietly. And this particular crime threatens both our species and the upcoming diplomatic relations. A slow smile spread across Finn's face. All right then, Commander. Let's catch ourselves some toxic dumpers. They advanced cautiously, keeping to the shadows along the tunnel wall. Talia adjusted her vision to the low light, her eyes taking on a faint silvery glow that she quickly dampened when Finn motioned for absolute darkness. The voices grew clearer, 3 distinct humans, their tones suggesting they were not authorized maintenance workers. Last batch for tonight, one voice was saying. Foreman says the inspectors are sniffing around the plant. This stuff pays too well to stop now, another replied. Besides, who's gonna find it down here? Fish? Rats? The third voice laughed. Maybe those aliens everyone's talking about. Heard they're landing tomorrow for some big meeting. Probably came to tell us to stop polluting their future real estate, the first voice joked. Too late for that. Finn and Talia exchanged glances in the darkness. The commander felt an unfamiliar emotion rising within her, not just diplomatic concern, but genuine anger. These humans were willfully damaging their own environment for profit, endangering not just the upcoming diplomatic mission but the health of their own species. They reached a bend in the tunnel. Beyond it, the voices were accompanied by the sound of liquid being poured. Finn motioned for Talia to stay back, then slowly peered around the corner. When he pulled back, his expression was grim. 3 men, industrial barrels, definitely not city workers, he whispered. They're dumping directly into the main flow. I need to document this, but my comm unit doesn't have enough range down here to call for backup. Talia considered their situation. My communicator can penetrate these structures, but it would alert my ship. That would trigger diplomatic protocols that might complicate matters. Complicate how? Finn asked. The Luminari take threats to diplomatic personnel very seriously, she explained, choosing her words carefully. The response would be proportionate but decisive. Understanding dawned on Finn's face. You mean your people might consider this an act of aggression? It would certainly color the initial diplomatic interactions, Talia acknowledged. Finn ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. Okay, so we need to handle this ourselves. I can document the dumping with my device, but we need to find out who they're working for. That barrel has markings, if I can get a clear image. Talia's antennae suddenly twitched in alarm. The concentration of toxins is increasing rapidly. My shield will only provide protection for another 20 minutes at most. Finn's expression hardened with resolve. Then we'd better work quickly. He reached into his utility belt and removed a small device. This is a maintenance drone. It's supposed to check pipe integrity, but it has a camera. I'll need to get closer to deploy it effectively. Talia made a swift decision that would have shocked her superiors. I will create a diversion. When they are distracted, deploy your drone. That's too dangerous, Finn began, but Talia was already removing something from a concealed pocket in her uniform. This is a luminary light sphere, she explained, holding up what appeared to be a small silver marble. It's designed for emergency illumination, but in these tunnels. It'll seem like something otherworldly, Finn finished, catching on immediately. Clever. Talia felt an unexpected warmth at his approval. I will throw it beyond their position. When they investigate, move quickly. With precision that spoke of her military background, Talia calculated the trajectory, then tossed the sphere. It arced silently through the air, landing with a soft splash well beyond where the men were working. A moment later, it activated, sending brilliant pulses of blue-white light dancing across the tunnel walls. The effect was instantaneous. The dumpers' voices rose in alarm. What the hell is that? Some kind of electrical problem? Go check it out. As footsteps splashed toward the mysterious light, Finn darted forward, deploying his drone with practiced efficiency. The tiny machine hummed to life, its lens capturing the abandoned barrels and their corporate markings before moving to record the faces of the men now cautiously approaching Talia's diversion. Talia felt a surge of satisfaction at their successful coordination, followed immediately by a wave of dizziness that caught her completely off guard. Her shield was failing faster than anticipated, the toxic compounds beginning to affect her system. She leaned against the wall, her silver skin taking on an unhealthy bluish tinge. Finn returned to her side just as her knees buckled. His strong arms caught her before she could fall into the contaminated water. Commander, he whispered urgently, alarm clear in his voice. Your shield. Degrading rapidly, she managed, her normally melodic voice strained. The compounds are more aggressive than anticipated. The light sphere was still distracting the dumpers, but Finn knew it wouldn't last much longer. He made a split-second decision, lifting the surprisingly lightweight alien diplomat into his arms. Hold on, he murmured, feeling her shield crackling against his protective gear. I know a maintenance shaft that should lead us away from this contamination. It's not on the maps. As he carried her swiftly back the way they had come, Talia found herself focusing on the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her side, so different from the triple beat of luminary physiology, yet somehow reassuring in its strength and constancy. We have the evidence, she said weakly, her antennae drooping. The mission. First we get you to safety, Finn replied firmly. Then we deal with these environmental criminals. Some things are more important than schedules, Commander. And despite everything her training had taught her, Talia Vex Zora found herself agreeing. The maintenance shaft Finn had mentioned turned out to be a narrow vertical tube with rusted metal rungs embedded in its sides. Talia had regained enough strength to climb on her own, though Finn stayed close behind her, ready to catch her if her weakened limbs gave out. The toxins had affected her more severely than either of them had anticipated, her silver-hued skin now marbled with concerning blue streaks where her biological systems struggled to neutralize the foreign compounds. Just a bit further, Finn encouraged from below. This shaft connects to an old transportation tunnel. The air should be cleaner there. Talia focused on each rung, her diplomat's composure stretched to its limits. On her world, physical exertion was rarely necessary, transportation was automated, environments controlled. This primal struggle against gravity while fighting toxin-induced weakness was entirely outside her experience. When they finally emerged into the transportation tunnel, Talia sank to her knees on the relatively dry concrete platform. The air here was noticeably fresher, tinged with dust rather than sewage and chemicals. Ancient lighting fixtures still functioned sporadically, casting long shadows across abandoned tracks. Finn crouched beside her, genuine concern etched across his features. "How are you holding up, Commander?" Talia conducted a swift internal assessment. "My biological purification systems are functioning, but operating at reduced capacity. I require approximately 30 minutes to process the remaining toxins." "Take all the time you need," Finn said, settling beside her. He pulled a water container from his belt and offered it to her. "It's clean. Might help flush your system." Talia accepted it gratefully, her typical aversion to shared drinking vessels forgotten in the face of necessity. The water was cool and remarkably pure, nothing like the contaminated flow they'd been following. As she drank, she surveyed their new surroundings. "This appears to be an obsolete transit system," she observed, her voice stronger now. Finn nodded. "Subway tunnel. This section was abandoned about 40 years ago when they rerouted the line. Most people have forgotten it exists." Talia's antennae twitched suddenly, picking up vibrations that human senses would miss. "We are not alone here." Finn tensed, his hand moving to a tool on his belt that could double as a weapon if necessary. "You sure?" "Multiple life forms," Talia confirmed, her head tilting as she concentrated. "Human, I believe. Moving with purpose, but cautiously. Not the chemical dumpers." Before Finn could respond, the shadows at the far end of the platform shifted. A figure stepped into a pool of dim light, a thin woman with close-cropped gray hair, wearing layers of mismatched but clean clothing. She carried no visible weapon, but her stance suggested readiness for either flight or confrontation. "You're not police," the woman stated flatly. "And you're certainly not maintenance." Her gaze fixed on Talia, widening slightly but showing remarkably little surprise. "And you're definitely not from around here." More figures materialized from the shadows, a dozen people of varying ages and appearances, all watching with the wariness of those accustomed to unwelcome attention. Talia recognized the protective formation they had adopted, a community defending its territory. Finn slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm Finn Walsh, City Maintenance. This is Commander Talia. We're just passing through, trying to reach the North Junction." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Through our home?" "The North Junction sealed off. Has been for months." "Sealed?" Finn looked genuinely surprised. "That wasn't on any of my maps." A younger man stepped forward, his expression suspicious. "Why would it be? City doesn't acknowledge we exist. Why would they acknowledge the changes we make?" Talia struggled to her feet, her diplomatic training overriding her physical discomfort. These humans, living in abandoned tunnels beneath their city, represented an unexpected complexity to Earth society that had not been included in her briefing materials. "We apologize for the intrusion," she said formally, her melodic voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I am Commander Talia Vex Zora of the Luminari Diplomatic Corps. May I ask whom I have the honor of addressing?" The formality seemed to catch the tunnel dwellers off guard. The gray-haired woman studied Talia for a long moment before responding. Eleanor, she finally said. Former professor of urban engineering at the university. Most folks down here just call me professor. She gestured to the community behind her. This is the underpass. We prefer to live by our own rules. Talia recognized the subtle challenge in the woman's tone, a leader establishing boundaries. It was a diplomatic dance she understood well. Your sovereignty is acknowledged and respected, Talia replied with a slight bow, using formal luminary protocol for first contact with an autonomous community. We seek passage only, not interference. Eleanor's eyebrows rose, and the tension in her shoulders eased fractionally. Politer than most visitors we get. She turned to Finn. You said you need to reach the North Junction? Why? Finn glanced at Talia, who gave a subtle nod of approval. Commander Talia needs to reach a rendezvous point for an important diplomatic meeting, he explained. We were traveling through the main sewer tunnels, but we discovered illegal chemical dumping. The toxins are particularly dangerous to her physiology. Murmurs rippled through the gathered community. Eleanor's expression hardened. The dumping has been getting worse, she confirmed. We've sealed off several tunnels that connect to those areas. The chemicals were making people sick. We have evidence, Talia said, gesturing to Finn's recording device. Images of the perpetrators and the containers with corporate markings. This announcement caused a stir. A middle-aged man with a professor's bearing pushed forward. You have proof? Actual proof we could take to the authorities, he asked eagerly. Authorities don't care about complaints from tunnel dwellers, Russell, Eleanor reminded him wearily. But they might care about complaints from an alien diplomat, Russell countered, studying Talia with new interest. Talia saw the political dynamics at play, much like diplomatic situations she had navigated on other worlds. These humans had been marginalized, their concerns dismissed. They had adapted by creating their own community, but remained vulnerable to the actions of the surface world. In that moment, Talia made a decision that went beyond her official mission parameters. I propose an exchange, she said formally. We will provide copies of our evidence to be used as your community sees fit. In return, we request safe passage through your territory to reach our destination. Eleanor regarded her thoughtfully. And what exactly would an alien diplomat gain from helping a bunch of tunnel dwellers? Understanding, Talia replied honestly. My mission is to evaluate Earth for potential diplomatic relations. That evaluation should include all aspects of your society, not merely those presented in official channels. For the first time, Eleanor smiled, a quick, sharp expression that transformed her weathered face. Well, I'll be damned. An honest politician, from another planet no less. She turned to her community. What do you think, folks? Do we help our unusual visitors? A chorus of affirmative responses followed, with Russell looking particularly pleased. Eleanor nodded decisively. All right then. We can get you to the North Junction, but there's a catch. She hesitated, then continued. The direct path is blocked by a collapse. The alternate route goes through the waterfall chamber. It's safe enough, but... Her eyes fixed on Talia's immaculate uniform, now stained but still obviously designed for cleanliness. Let's just say it lives up to its name. Talia felt Finn's eyes on her, gauging her reaction. She knew what he was thinking, the fastidious Luminari commander, already traumatized by the sewer journey, now facing what would undoubtedly be an even more intense assault on her sensibilities. 6 hours ago, she would have searched desperately for alternatives. Now, she merely straightened her posture, her antennae lifting with determination. We accept your terms and your guidance, she stated firmly. Lead on. As Eleanor organized a small escort party, Finn moved closer to Talia. You know, most humans would be freaking out about now, he observed quietly. Strange planet, toxic chemicals, living sewers, and now a community of tunnel dwellers. But you're handling it like you negotiate in abandoned subway stations every day. Talia's lips curved in a small smile. Perhaps I am adapting to Earth's unique diplomatic challenges. Finn's answering grin held genuine admiration. I think Earth is the one that needs to adapt to you, Commander. The unexpected compliment warmed her in ways that had nothing to do with her biological recovery systems. As they followed their new guides deeper into the tunnel network, Talia realized that no amount of luminary training could have prepared her for this mission, or for how it was changing her fundamental understanding of what it meant to be truly adaptable. The waterfall chamber was aptly named. Talia stood at its entrance, momentarily frozen as she took in the spectacle before her. A massive underground cascade poured from a rupture in the ceiling, the water splitting into multiple streams as it crashed down over a series of concrete ledges before disappearing into a grate in the floor. Decades of mineral deposits had created formations that resembled the crystal sculptures of her homeworld, though these were brown and orange rather than pristine white. City water main broke about 15 years ago, Eleanor explained, raising her voice over the roar. City fixed the main but never bothered to repair this section. The water's mostly clean, filtered through layers of rock before it gets here. Mostly clean, Talia repeated, her antennae twitching with apprehension. Russell, the academic who had been so interested in their evidence, smiled sympathetically. It's the only way to the North Junction unless you want to backtrack all the way to the eastern tunnels. That would add hours to your journey. Finn checked the time on his device. We're already cutting it close for the rendezvous, Commander. Talia drew herself up to her full height, her silver eyes reflecting the dancing water. Then we proceed. Eleanor nodded approvingly. We'll go single file. The ledge along the left wall is slippery but stable. Keep one hand on the wall at all times. She glanced at Talia's distinctive uniform. Hope that fancy outfit of yours is waterproof. It was designed to withstand the vacuum of space, Talia replied with dignity. I believe it can manage some moisture. The truth, which she kept to herself, was that Luminari rarely encountered free-flowing water in such quantities. Her homeworld's water was carefully controlled in sealed systems, purified and distributed with mathematical precision. The chaotic energy of this waterfall represented everything her people had engineered out of their existence: unpredictability, wildness, natural force unconstrained by technology. As they made their way along the narrow ledge, water sprayed across them continuously. Despite her shield's best efforts, Talia was soon drenched. The sensation was foreign and initially distressing, then, unexpectedly, exhilarating. The water was cool against her skin, carrying scents of minerals and earth that her sensitive antennae identified as surprisingly complex rather than simply dirty. Halfway across the chamber, the ledge narrowed dramatically. Eleanor paused, turning back to address them. We have to duck through this next section. The ceiling's low and the spray is heavier. Finn looked at Talia with concern. You okay to continue? You're looking a bit overwhelmed. Talia realized her antennae were fully extended, a physiological response to intense sensory input that would be obvious to any luminari, though the humans likely couldn't interpret the meaning. I am processing new experiences, she answered carefully. It is intense, but not unmanageable. In truth, she was experiencing a sensation entirely alien to her species, a kind of surrender to environmental forces, a relinquishing of the control that was central to luminari existence. The water enveloped her, carrying microscopic particles that her sensors detected but could no longer categorize as simply contaminants. There was life in this water, millions of microorganisms, minerals from deep underground, traces of the city above, all combining in a complex dance that defied the sterile perfection of her world. They continued through the spray, emerging finally on the far side of the chamber. Talia's uniform, designed to repel most substances, was nevertheless soaked through. Her silver hair clung to her head, water dripping from her antennae. Yet she felt strangely invigorated rather than defiled. Just another half-kilometer, Eleanor assured them, leading the way into a drier tunnel. The North Junction is just beyond that maintenance door. As they walked, Russell fell into step beside Talia. I couldn't help noticing your reaction to our waterfall, he said. You seemed almost fascinated. It was unlike anything on my world, Talia admitted. The Luminari control every aspect of our environment. Water is contained, purified, precisely measured. Sounds efficient, Russell observed. But perhaps lacking in certain, spontaneous experiences? That has not previously been considered a deficiency, Talia replied, though a new uncertainty colored her tone. Different worlds, different values, Russell said diplomatically. Though I suspect there's more common ground than either of our peoples might initially recognize. His words echoed in Talia's mind as they continued their journey. The underpass community bid them farewell at the maintenance door, after arrangements were made to share the evidence of the chemical dumping. Eleanor clasped Talia's hand, a gesture the commander would have recoiled from just hours ago, but now accepted without hesitation. You're an unusual diplomat, the former professor said with a shrewd look. Not many would see value in knowing about folks like us. A complete understanding requires all perspectives, Talia responded. Your community has shown remarkable adaptation and resilience, qualities the Luminari could perhaps learn from. And perhaps we could learn something about planning and organization from your people, Eleanor returned with a wry smile. Safe travels, Commander. Hope your first impression of Earth isn't entirely based on our underworldly accommodations. As Talia and Finn continued alone through the final stretch of tunnels, the environment gradually improved. The North Junction was relatively clean, a major interchange point with proper maintenance access. We'll be at the surface in about 10 minutes, Finn informed her, checking his map. Your rendezvous point is just 2 blocks from the exit. Talia nodded, suddenly finding herself reluctant to end their journey. This experience has been educational, she said finally. Finn chuckled. That's one way to put it. Most people would use words like disgusting or traumatizing. Those would have been my descriptors initially, Talia acknowledged. Yet I find my perspective has evolved. They reached a maintenance ladder leading to a surface access point. Sunlight filtered down, a small circle of brightness after hours in the dimly lit tunnels. Finn began to climb, then paused, looking back at her. You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about Luminari environments being perfect and controlled, he said thoughtfully. Seems to me, perfection doesn't leave much room for growth. It's the imperfections, the challenges, that push us to adapt. Talia considered this as she followed him up the ladder. A provocative theory. On my world, we have eliminated the need for such messy adaptation. And yet, Finn pointed out as they emerged into the sunlight, you adapted remarkably well to our messy world. The observation struck her with unexpected force. He was right, she had adapted, continuously adjusting to circumstances that would have sent most Luminari into protective stasis. More than that, she had found value in the experience, gaining insights that would never have been possible in the controlled environment of her homeworld. The rendezvous point came into view, a cordoned-off area where a small Luminari shuttle waited, its gleaming surface reflecting the sunlight with mathematical precision. Several of her crew stood nearby, their immaculate uniforms and rigid postures suddenly appearing strangely artificial to her eyes. Before they approached, Talia turned to Finn. Her uniform was stained and damp, her silver hair disheveled, her skin bearing traces of the journey that her biological systems had not yet fully processed. By Luminari standards, she was unfit for public view, let alone diplomatic duties. Yet she had never felt more qualified to represent her people. I must thank you, Finn Walsh, she said formally. You have guided me through more than physical tunnels. Finn smiled, understanding more than she had expressed. Just doing my job, Commander. Though I admit, it wasn't exactly a standard maintenance shift. Talia hesitated, then made a decision. She reached up and removed a small silver emblem from her collar, a symbol of the Luminari diplomatic corps, rarely shared with other species. A token of appreciation, she said, placing it in his palm. And perhaps a reminder that even the most different worlds can find common ground. Finn accepted it with unexpected reverence. What will you tell your people about Earth? About all of this? He gestured vaguely at his still-soiled maintenance uniform. Talia's antennae lifted with new confidence. I will tell them that Earth's true strength lies in its seeming contradictions. That beneath the surface, quite literally, I found complexity, adaptation, and resilience that our world might learn from. She paused. I will also recommend immediate intervention regarding the illegal chemical dumping, with attention to its effects on all communities, including those not officially acknowledged. They'll listen to you? Finn asked. I am a diplomatic commander, Talia replied with newfound conviction. But more importantly, I am now a commander who understands that true diplomacy requires more than sterile protocols. Sometimes, it requires crawling through sewers. As they approached the waiting Luminari delegation, Talia noticed their shocked expressions at her appearance. Her second-in-command hurried forward, a decontamination unit already activated in his hand. Commander. Your condition. Talia raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Is exactly as required for this mission, Lieutenant. I have gathered essential information through direct experience of Earth's environment. She turned to introduce Finn, who stood awkwardly under the scrutiny of the pristine Luminari officers. This human has provided invaluable guidance and insights. His assistance will be noted prominently in my report to the Council. The lieutenant's antennae twitched with confusion, but he nodded respectfully. The preliminary conference begins in 30 minutes, Commander. Perhaps a brief decontamination. I will attend as I am, Talia interrupted firmly. My current state represents important context for our discussions. As the lieutenant retreated in bewilderment, Finn leaned closer to Talia. You're going to a diplomatic conference looking like you've been swimming in a sewer? I have been swimming in a sewer, Talia pointed out reasonably. And that experience has provided me with diplomatic insights no sterile briefing could offer. Her silver eyes gleamed with determination. The Luminari value truth and precision. It would be imprecise to present myself as untouched by Earth when I have been so thoroughly touched. Finn's laughter was genuine. Well, I'd pay good money to see those other diplomats' faces. He sobered, extending his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Good luck, Commander. Hope our worlds can find a way to work together, sewers and all. Talia clasped his hand without hesitation, no shield between them now. I believe we will, Finn Walsh. After all, if a Luminari commander and a human maintenance engineer can navigate toxic waste, criminal dumpers, tunnel dwellers, and waterfall chambers together, surely our species can navigate diplomatic relations. As she boarded the shuttle that would take her to the conference, Talia caught her reflection in its polished surface. Her uniform was stained, her silver skin bore traces of her journey, and, most shockingly for a Luminari, she was utterly unconcerned about these imperfections. Instead, she felt a new kind of confidence. She had experienced Earth at its worst and found value there. She had abandoned protocols when necessary and discovered more effective approaches. She had adapted, evolved, and emerged stronger. The pristine commander who had crashed in Earth's sewers hours ago would have considered the mission compromised by these deviations. Commander Talia Vexora now recognized that the mission had not been compromised but enhanced, just as she had been. As the shuttle rose toward the conference venue, Talia allowed herself a small smile that would have shocked her superiors. The Luminari had come to evaluate Earth for compatibility. They had not anticipated that the evaluation might work in both directions. Earth, with all its messy complexity, had evaluated Talia Vex Zora, and somehow, despite everything, she felt she had passed its test.